Good afternoon. Thanks for being brave enough to come in from the warm weather. It's nice to finally have some nice weather going on. I know you got a lot going on, so we got to leave early. As I kind of whispered to some of you, I don't even know if we're going to go till 3 today, so I know you'll be really upset by that. But as I was going through the slides this morning, and it kind of depends on how many people show up, you know the drill. So we'll wrap it up and just sneak out behind Rusty so he doesn't see you. So, and help play dumb. We'll go like that. So I just got to wrap up a couple things, but I just want to say I just appreciated getting the chance to get to know a lot of you this year. I know I don't work specifically with math teachers very much in my STEM role, but if there's anything I can ever do for you, let me know. But I've enjoyed this experience, and I hope that just through some of our conversations that there's been something you've gleaned from this year. So real quick here, again, our purpose for why we're here, creating a collaborative learning environment will improve student inclusion and engagement, in addition to establishing a safe environment to grow from mistakes and success. So no matter what your style of preference is for mastering this environment, we're all here for the same reason, which is pretty cool. And then our outcomes, what we've been working towards is we start off by examining our values and beliefs and identity as it relates to being a facilitator of learning. We created the vision statement early on of the ideal classroom, which I still have. This poster has been up for so long by my desk, the pink highlight had actually faded off of it, and I had to re-highlight it yesterday. I was intrigued by that. The science mind was going on that a little bit. And then we've been working on kind of your development of your implementation plan throughout the year. So pretty straightforward there. Our agenda, of course, we're going to review our mission and norms. We're going to watch the computer freeze in a cool position. We're going to talk briefly about levels of culture, and I don't know how much you've gotten into this yet, maybe this morning or in previous discussions. And then I wanted to talk briefly about disparity ideologies and how it relates to academic mindset, and then have our time to reflect at the end. The big thing, especially if you have to leave early, is don't forget about the survey, which I think is on the second to last slide, to make sure that that is completed before you leave today. All right, let's see if it's going to work. It did. Oh, yes. Okay, so back up. There we go. Quick inclusion activity, but you need a partner. So see if you can find a partner in the next 3.7 seconds. Go. All right, so I'm going a little rogue because this is not the inclusion activity that they put into the slide deck for me, so I just want to do this because I did it in another meeting and I thought it was a pretty cool experience. So what this is it's going to be a partner, so who's going to be my partner? Okay, step on over for a second. So we'll demonstrate real quick. It's pretty straightforward. You just got to look to each other and you're just going to practice your listening. And we're going to count 1, 2, 3, 1, 2, 3, 1, 2, 3, but we're going to alternate back and forth. So I'd say 1, you would say 3.
Do I keep going?
Yeah.
4?
So no, you just
stick back.
Keep
going
1.
back for it.
Yep.
1,
2,
3,
1,
2,
3. So
1.
okay, until I prompt you to stop. Okay. Any questions? And then we'll add something in later. All right, go. All right, let's try to say 1. All right, go ahead and stop right there. Anybody do it perfectly? Because we didn't either, and I know the activity. So, right till the end?
Yeah, right before you said stop, I think I was going to mess it up.
So I started anticipating what she was going to say. I started saying like 3 for you, and I was like, what am I doing? All right, so now we're going to change up a little bit. Kind of the same routine, but instead of saying 1, you're going to clap. So it'll be 2, 3, 2, 3. Okay? All right, go ahead. Now, was that easier or harder? Harder. Okay. All right, so now it's going to be, and then 3. So clap, stomp, 3. All right? Go. So harder? Okay. All right. So now it's going to be, okay, I almost screwed up already, just demonstrated it. Clap, stomp, snap, or fake it if you can't snap. Okay? All right. Did anybody find that one easier than the last one? So that's interesting because the first time I was introduced this activity, a lot of people thought that that last one was the easiest of them. It was even, for some people, easier than the actual counting, which I don't believe, but whatever. For me,
say it and do an action at the same time.
Yeah.
Say an action is
Yeah. So what would be the, obviously this is an inclusion activity, and we all know the purpose of an inclusion activity, but how would you think something like this would benefit our kids outside of just kind of the fun part of it?
Brain
Moving
break.
and thinking.
Yeah, moving and thinking, and then what else might it be?
But, and see that even if there are students that are more advanced than others, that I would think would maybe show other skills that you would assume this student has it, but this student has the skill to do it.
Right.
So it would show different strengths of the students, maybe that didn't have that strength in other things.
Absolutely.
Like bonding.
Yeah, what was that?
It's a more even playing field.
It is, yeah, in a lot of ways, because even me as the one who was like teaching you the idea, I still struggled with doing it myself. And for me, it was the listening. Just practicing the intent of listening to what she was saying, because I could hear what you guys were saying and what you were saying behind me and so I was constantly, like I would especially hear you ladies, and I would think, wait, no, I gotta listen here, not there. So just the practicing the listening skills too. So, at any rate, Keith, who you might see around, he works with the swivels a lot. He kind of learned that at a design thinking workshop that he went to, and I thought, well, that was really cool. I need to start doing that too. So, take it or leave it. But I thought it'd be a great way to start and get us active and moving. Whew, now I'm like sweaty too. Yeah. Yes. Right. So I was telling a story of my first year of teaching, and by this point in the year, I was so burnt out I couldn't even take it anymore. So I think, like the last 2 days of school, we basically played wiffle ball with the gym class outside, because even I wanted to get outside by then. But all right. So our mission statement, as we said, is as a community, we believe in building a safe and collaborative learning environment where all members actively participate in productive, authentic discourse around meaningful tasks. We know that this was the ideal classroom environment, and I don't think that any of us have ever fully mastered it perfectly, but we all strive towards this mission. Pop it, Brandon Q. So our norms of collaboration: pausing, paraphrasing, posing questions, putting ideas on the table, providing data, paying attention to self and others, and presuming positive intentions. I would like to have us focus on 2 or 3 of these for today. Would somebody like to offer up what would be a norm that they would like the group to specifically focus on? Not that we're going to ignore the other ones, but is there anything on that list that you really want us to actively practice today?
Putting ideas on the table.
Okay, putting ideas on the table will be one. Can I get at least one more?
Presuming positive intention.
I love it. Presuming positive intentions. So let's actively as a group try to practice putting ideas on the table and recognizing that it's the idea that we're talking about and not the person who shared the idea. I always talked about with my kids about it being the thought bubble in the middle of the room. We're looking at that, not the person who shared it. And then you said presuming positive intentions. Yep. Okay, cool. I feel like at this time of the year, I really need to remember to resume positive intentions as everybody gets a little bit more tired into the school year. It's going to work. Perfect. We earlier this year talked about these sort of strategies for helping to create a safe space. Listening patiently. I find myself very guilty of not doing this. I have a bad tendency of trying to finish people's sentences for them. Or I think I know what they're going to say and I get excited and I want to talk about it. And I need to practice personally to be more patient with that listening. And in the book, you might recall, he talked about how you might want to respect the student's voice by not trying to interrupt them or trying to teach your students to not interrupt each other, to allow them that floor so that they feel like they belong. And that active listening as well, which was if Carolyn throws an idea on the table, that one of us would then pick up that idea and add it on to whatever we're going to say and not just ignore what she said, which to me is essentially like paraphrasing what she's saying, but it's that yes and opportunity as opposed to the no but, right? So I love that yes and Marcus does that to me all the time whenever we talk. He's like, yes, and then he adds on to what I'm going to say. Police your voice, recognizing that it's easy for us to want to be the ones dictating all the talking, but trying to allow the students to lead that conversation. So if Jason is throwing an idea out, trying to train your students to not speak, to have Jason not talk to me specifically, but to talk to the whole class. And trying to let me not dictate the conversation. Let them own it more. And then practice listening. We literally, as you know, we have to train our kids to do this. And you might recall in the first chapter of that book that he actually has like a training camp for the first 2 weeks of his class where they actively practice these listening skills. Most of you are familiar with good news and burning 5 minutes as ways to kind of start off a class. And then the high grade compliments, personally I love that one, and just making sure that the compliments you give are meaningful and purposeful and not just for the sake of trying to set an example. And sometimes those are given kind of privately or off to the side so that the student knows it means something. Has anybody seen the culture tree before? Just this morning? Did it come up this morning? I had a feeling it would. I hadn't talked with Rusty and the crew to see what they talked about. But this comes from Zaretta Hammond's work, Culturally Responsive Teaching in the Brain. And I felt like when I had first learned about this, that it connects perfectly to what we've been talking about all year. And it says culture is the way that the brain makes sense of the world. And I don't know if you got it this morning, but I have a handout real quick that has this in there. And I want to take a minute to kind of study that picture and some of the words that go along with it. Let me pass that out real quickly. The stapler on the copy machine is really wonky this morning, so if you have an oddly stapled paper, good luck with that. There's 3 more there. There's 2 there. Okay. So the actual culture tree is on the last page, but the conversation about what it means begins on page 22. So what I would like to ask for us to do is to take a couple minutes to quickly first study the diagram and just make sure you've got a chance to read it if you haven't yet. And then flip back to page 22, the front, where it says Understanding Culture. If you've read this before, great, just reskim it to review. If you haven't, great, skim it to review. But I would specifically want us to look at those different levels of culture. When you're finished, if you just flip your paper over so I know you're done, that would be appreciated. I think everybody is done reading through that. What I'd like to do is take an opportunity for us to kind of share some of our takeaways from that brief passage. I've got a protocol up there on the screen that we're going to follow through. I don't think we have a perfect number to have 3s, so we might have a group of 4. But the idea would be to get in groups of 3 and identify yourselves as A, B, or C. And person A would start us off, and basically you're just looking for some of the key points that resonated with you. You're not necessarily citing a big chunk of it, but you're just saying something like, hey, I noticed that on page 23 it said something about deep culture is how the brain does its encoding or something like that. And then person B will get a chance to practice pausing and paraphrasing. And so that would be your chance to make sure you get your opportunity to listen carefully, paraphrase back, and then person C will kind of probe a little bit deeper after a brief pause and ask, what are some things that make that important to you? And just an opportunity to share from that out. And you're going to keep rotating through so that everybody gets a chance to be person A. Any questions about that? Okay. All right, so try to find your trio. If you're a foursome, then just make a person D, and that person can probably paraphrase back person A's second response. All right, thank you. So I was kind of eavesdropping in conversations, and there was a lot to talk about there. So I'm curious, what were some things that really might have resonated with you or really piqued your attention that you wouldn't mind sharing? We're mindful that we're really focusing on practicing putting ideas on the table and then presuming positive intentions when those ideas are shared as well. So would anybody mind sharing something that just piqued their attention for the sake of conversation? Yeah?
I think just valuing understanding your own personal culture and your own personal beliefs, and then understanding that everyone around you is not identical, and that you might have some things that are in common, but not everything's going to be in common, and knowing that you then have to make adjustments in the case of the classroom setting for your students to be able to still be successful even though they don't have the same values.
Right. So being aware of everyone's wearing different shoes, even if the shoes look the same, they're not, and then applying that in how you practice in your classroom. Thank you. Yes?
We kind of talked about how we thought it was valuable in thinking that there are these 3 levels of culture, and we said that the tree was a really good way to illustrate that idea, and also help us to distinguish between the different parts, like which parts are more changing, which parts are more stagnant, as well as when each of those cultures comes into play. So for example, like the shallow one comes more into play with like individual interactions, whereas the deep culture is more like a worldview, so affecting everything. So just noticing some of those nuances.
Fantastic. So you found value in the analogy in the sense that it brought it to the forefront of your thinking and organized it in a way that could be applicable to your work. Wonderful. Anything else? Yeah, sorry.
We talked more about how culture isn't necessarily ethnicity, but it's in our 3 districts it's more of socioeconomic poverty and how different levels of poverty and economic situation can change these 3 levels as much as ethnicity.
Absolutely. So recognizing that even in a district or school that might not outwardly look diverse, this still has a key role in how you would go about reaching your students. That's wonderful. And that hits on some of the questions I was writing down too as I was rereading it. And to me, culture is deeper than just the word diversity. Like if you say diversity to me, and I'm not the expert on diversity and equity and inclusion training, but I am studying and I'm trying to grow my capacity to be more comfortable in that realm. But when I hear diversity, I just think about the differences, but I don't go to the root of those differences. And I feel like culture is going more towards the root, specifically with the tree. And I've seen the iceberg analogy before that they mentioned. I personally like the tree better because I do feel like it resonates more with me personally. So some of the questions I asked myself was, does this apply to a school without diversity? So in my view, I'd echo what you would say. Yes, I do. I do believe it does. And I've taught in schools that have been extremely white and rural or white and urban. And I've also been in diverse settings, and I still recognize that culture is key to really making that connection with my kiddos. So I'm glad to hear that has resonated in this room. Anything else that you guys want to point out? To me, I was trying to reflect back on my teaching and where did I, as I was trying to build relationships with my kids, was I aware of the deep culture? I mean, I'm not sure if I was cognitively aware of it, but I think there were times where I was maybe trying to reach down to that level, but I think there's some sense that the kids have to allow you to go there with them too. So there's still value in surface and shallow culture because it's still making those initial connections with the kids. So I would see it like the surface culture, instead of leaves, maybe fruit. And so that fruit has seeds, which can then eventually sprout into the rest of the tree, or whatever it might be. So there's still value in understanding surface culture and making that connection there. So personally, I feel like that's not to be overlooked then. Yeah?
And I personally can understand, or for myself, I am fine with or understand the surface culture, even the differences in deep culture,
Right.
but struggle with the shallow culture.
Oh, really?
I struggle with, the attitudes towards the elder or the nature of friendship or concepts of time. To me, that's just normal.
Right.
But to say that it's a culture piece or that it's not normal for everyone is hard for me. To me, those are the values and the PQs and all of those things that everybody's been taught.
Right.
That should be normal for high schoolers, but they're not.
So the coach in me wants to ask why, but I think you kind of hit on it a little bit in recognizing that your deep culture, your personal deep culture, is the reason why you're struggling with that other piece there. So you're actively seeing it within yourself and the impact it can have on a person.
Yep.
Wow. That's like a moment. kind of changing gears a little bit too, what about this protocol that we did, the triad inquiry protocol? What value, if any, would you see in potentially implementing something like this in your classroom if you don't already?
It forces everybody to have a role in the conversation.
Right. Keeps them engaged, right? Is it something that you probably have to coach your kids on how to do this, right? Like adults too. Like I can't just throw a protocol in front of you. Good luck. Can't throw a protocol in front of you and say, okay, you're going to do this, because for a lot of us, we come from districts where we don't utilize protocols all the time. And so the first time I had a principal that came in and said, you need to stick to the protocol, do not break the protocol, that felt weird. And so I found I had to train my kids on the importance of sticking to the protocol too. So if it says person A is going to say this and then person B is going to paraphrase, let's practice the paraphrasing again to make sure you're comfortable sticking to the protocol. And my experience, it didn't happen right away. So,
I think it gives everyone opportunity to say what resonated with them about something. I mean, because everyone got the chance to be person A.
yeah.
Like to say what was through everything was
Right.
the most important thing to them. So.
And what's the value of that last question that person C asks?
That they need to share why it's important. What made it be yours?
Right. Why did you
What
own
made it
that?
be your opinion? Deeper level. Yeah.
I almost feel like that's starting to tap into the deep culture itself. So it's funny that the protocol about deep culture tapped a little bit into that shallow and deep culture by asking that question to me personally. But what it's really doing is that metacognition, right? And the Visible Learning book says that's already a highly effective practice to think about your thinking. And so it's not just saying it for the sake of saying it. So like if I'm put on the spot and I have to pick something, I'm going to say, oh, well, this sounds important, so I'm going to say this sentence here. Well, why does it sound important is a deeper question. Because then they're really starting to apply it to their thinking in whatever purpose it might mean to them.
I think it allows our students to get to know each other better as well.
Yeah.
You can say something about the content, like, okay, this is the thing that I read, and here's what this person said.
Right.
Then it's almost a little bit personal to say why something is important to you.
Yeah, heck yeah. You're definitely getting into that, for sure. And so then again, the value of the protocol is also enforcing the safe environment too, right? And by me starting off by saying, remember, we're focusing on putting ideas on the table. I'm trying to make you feel comfortable to share ideas, right? And so I should have probably said it again before the protocol. Hey, remember, we're just putting ideas on the table, and what's the value of doing that? So hopefully you can see support with everything here. So as I was reflecting on this, I thought about everything we've talked about this year. And personally, I feel like culture is the big umbrella. And ultimately, we want our culture to be safe and collaborative. And then we've talked about some actions to help achieve that. Now, they don't just automatically solve the problem in a classroom and say, you can't just say, okay, we made a mission statement, now it's safe and collaborative. We've talked about that. You need the norms. You need other strategies. We just went through a few strategies, and those aren't everything, and those might not be perfect for your situation. But there's a lot of strategies out there we can use, and a lot of times it's the protocols themselves, similar to what we just did, that help create that structure, the purposeful action to build the culture that we want in our classrooms. And sometimes the value of that structure is it breaks that schema that they have for how a classroom should be run. So I know you're math teachers, and I know you hear it all the time. Math, I'm not good at math. Math's not my favorite subject. My coworker just said it to me at lunch today. No, don't worry, she's not a STEM consultant. So, but she said, I was never good at math. And I thought to myself, we're about to go sit down there with all the math teachers, and she doesn't know it. But there's that prevailing schema that people have that they'll never be good at math. And I don't know if this is the magic bullet, but this is certainly part of the solution, right? It's creating that culture, tapping into all levels of that culture by trying to find as many strategies as we can, and sticking consistently to our norms and our why. It has to be a why that we all believe in. We all believe in this mission statement. That's why you're still here in May, right? We all want the same thing. It might look a little bit differently in each of our classes, but we all want the same thing. Oh, sorry. I get passionate about this stuff because it's important to me, right? And I know it's important to you as well. So there's so much value in the culture conversation. We could probably spend a whole other year talking about that, but you guys want to get out before 3. So we'll see what's next here. Oh. Simple question. Speaking of all you being math teachers, I know there's these fancy math practices out there. So why don't you turn and talk at your tables just about how might this conversation of culture really support the mathematical practices? And be willing to put ideas on the table and presume positive intentions from those sharing those ideas. Okay, please pause. Please pause. And I know as I'm listening to conversations, I know there's some very deep conversations happening in certain groups. So I'm curious if anybody wants to share some of the talking points that were brought up again, putting ideas on the table, just throwing out ideas, and if there's anything else that wants to be discussed about that, we can dive in. But you guys want to share what you were getting into there?
Well, we were talking a little bit about, like, culture is so complex because we have these, are we talking about the culture within our classroom or the culture that the kids are bringing from home, like socioeconomic culture, where, maybe home doesn't value education, but at school we're trying to create a culture that does value education. How do you get kids who don't value education to value education? We were just talking about the cultural shift within our district and over the last 20 years or so, and how it's becoming more polarized, and what do you do? And it just seemed to open more questions than answers.
Gotcha. No, that's fair. So I think what I'm hearing you saying is that there's different lenses that you can look at culture through, and that might impact the conversation in a different way. I think that's fair. Anybody want to add anything to that? Probably not. Not at least at 2:15 and a warm day. So I think that's fair. I think you're right. It's going to depend on your point of view, what lens you're looking through, as far as to what effect is this conversation going to have on the ultimate student achievement, or even the previous question before that. So,
because our goal is to get all right. We want all kids to learn.
Right.
We want all kids to buy into
what
we're trying to do, but it's just a complex.
So, just to put an idea on the table, so my thinking as I'm typing up these slides today is that in order to improve the culture in my classroom, I need to be looking at these different lenses of all these different aspects of their individual cultures outside of my classroom. And I don't think it's reasonable to say I need to understand all of my students' different cultures. I don't think that's fair to ask a teacher to do, but I think I have to at least show that I'm outwardly trying to. And that's when I make that connection with the kid, that then they're more willing to buy into whatever it is that I'm dishing out. And I think that's what you're getting at, is that you recognize the complexities behind all that. And it's not an easy answer, but I think the value here is recognizing the different levels of those cultures, and that maybe what I had been doing in the past wasn't enough. I felt like I was heavy on the shallow and the surface, especially the surface, initially in my teaching career. I feel like as I got older, I was better at dabbing into the shallow culture, but I don't feel like I've really ever mastered that. So, yeah. So I appreciate that there might be more questions because of that, but I think there's value in us being aware of it at the forefront. Whew. Good stuff. Anything else you guys want to share? By the way, I need to stop saying the word guys. I apologize for that. Speaking of diversity, equity, inclusion, is there anything else anybody else would like to share? Okay. So, is it fair for me to say, and I don't want to assume and speak for everybody in this room, but is it a fair statement for me to say that we all value and appreciate the significance of culture in our classrooms? Okay, and it's fine. I am not offended if you want to argue against that. That is perfectly fine by me. Is it fair for me to say that we see value in the norms and the protocols and the structures that we've talked about throughout the year. Now, it might look differently in each classroom and environment, but I feel like all of you who are here found some value in that in some way. So the ultimate reflection question becomes, what barriers are still in place for us as we move through? So if I reflect on my classroom last year and I know there was room for improvement, why do I need to improve? What was there that stopped me from really going all in on some of these ideas? And then how might I remove those barriers? And for me, that would be the biggest takeaway when you walk out the room is, like, there were people that came to me like, I know the norms of collaboration are good, but I'm just not comfortable putting that into my procedure and my routine. And so I would ask that person to say, why would you feel that way? And I'm not trying to judge that person. I'm just trying to get to what is it that's really causing that resistance to move forward.
Because you try to take on too much at one time. You need to focus on one thing.
And that's especially this year, right? With everything with snow days and whatever else is going on. It's not reasonable for me to come and say, hey, you need to be doing your norms collaboration now that's December, right? Or whenever it is. So what might be a strategy to overcome that? And I'm not saying I have the answer to that, but think about what could be a strategy. For me, it would be, okay, I'm going to try next year to start doing this consistently at the beginning of the year. Because that's when it's a clean slate, new kiddos, new opportunity for me. I'm a little bit more energized, right? And then it's an opportunity for it to take root. And so by the time you get to December next year, you're not having to try so hard to make this happen. Because the kids have hopefully started to pick up on it.
And I think we're supposed to have the answer. So for us to try something different, if it doesn't go well.
Yeah, exactly. Right. We all value risk, but we're afraid to take it.
Right.
Yeah.
Right.
And for me, it always comes down to, well, I was never taught that way anyway, so why would I want to teach that way myself, right? But I think sometimes we sell our kids short for what value they can actually provide to the classroom through their own voice. And so it's really trying to get that buy-in from them to do that, to contribute. But we all want the same thing, right? We don't want to be us against them. We want to be everyone together. And I know in your ideal vision, we were moving collaboratively with our kids, not trying to fight against them to get them to do what we need them to do. We want that buy-in. And so it's important to look at what barriers are there on your end and work on removing those. I'm going to skip over this. I'll come back to it in a second. But this quote really resonates with me. And I saw this year for the first time. When you plant lettuce, if it does not grow well, you don't blame the lettuce. You look for reasons it is not doing well. It may need fertilizer or more water or less sun, but you never blame the lettuce. And so one of the things we do have control over are the barriers that affect us. And whether it's our own cultural experiences or whatever it is that we can control, whatever we can do to try to remove those barriers, I think it's important for us to focus on those. Now, the reason I want to skip back to this slide here is I have found in some of my experiences that I have been guilty of some of these things that have basically I've created self-imposed barriers on my own teaching practice. And so there's 3 different levels here. There's the deficit ideology, which I feel like my kids who are struggling, I need to fix them. They're doing something wrong. So they're not getting the math, or they're not doing their homework, or they're not coming to class, or for me it was they're not coming on time, or they're not participating in the conversations. So to me it's, what are they doing wrong? But that's a deficit ideology. It's ignoring that there might be other things that are causing these issues. I was super guilty of grit ideology. The idea that if my kids could just learn to work harder, they would get better at this. But what it is I recognize there's barriers, but I'm not doing anything about the barriers that my kids might have. So I'm trying to work towards this more of a structural ideology of what barriers exist for me, but also for my kiddos, and how might I work to remove those barriers. But I've come to find that that's sometimes hard, because sometimes those barriers are more institutional, than they are just within my classroom. So I'm trying to find other ways to lessen barriers to provide a more positive experience for the kids that I work with. So I just wanted to, when I saw this slide the first time, it was like kind of getting kicked in the shin, because I was like, oh man, that was definitely me. That I thought my kids just need to work harder, because I believe in hard work. I've always kind of been proud of my work ethic, so I felt like that's what made me successful. But I gotta recognize that there's a lot of kids out there that are working really, really hard, but still aren't finding the same success I had. One thing I always bring up too is not using poverty as an excuse for why our kids aren't doing well. You know, because we've got data that says even our poor white kids are still outperforming our poor minority kids, even though they're the same poverty level. So I got to get myself away from this idea that they just work harder, they'll be better. And it's just because they're poor that they can't learn this. I can't use that as an excuse. So the only thing I did to put this slide up was to get you to do some self-reflection to see where you might be. If you don't feel like it applies to you, that's fine. I'm cool with that. But I felt like I had a responsibility to share it because of the impact it had on me. And look at this, I'm almost done. The last big thing before we get into our reflection. These are the components of an academic mindset. The first one on the left is I belong to this academic community. I have a strong sense of academic belonging where students see themselves as members of not only a social community, but an intellectual community. The next one up, I can succeed at this. The degree to which students believe they are good at a particular kind of task or field of study is strongly associated with academic perseverance. So you math teachers fight this all the time. Next one, my ability and competence grow with my effort. The degree to which students have a growth mindset means they are more likely to interpret academic challenge or mistakes as an opportunity to learn and develop their brains. And lastly, this work has value to me. The intrinsic value placed on academic tasks and topics that connect in some way to a student's lives, future educational pursuits. I don't know why pursuits is spelled wrong on that. It's like a cat spelled it. Pursuits. Or current interests. So just reflecting on things we've talked about today, I know I've set up there the deficit, grit, and structural ideologies, but I think it goes back to the culture conversation too. How does that play into all these different components of an academic mindset? I think we all aware they do, but it's being conscious of those as we move forward. I guess the last thing I'd like to do is just think about what are you doing in your class, and maybe it's not tomorrow, but whenever you might be, what supports do you have currently or need to create a safe and collaborative learning community that understands its purpose and honors all components of academic mindset? So even if there's just one thing that you haven't been doing that you could start to do, think about where your opportunities might be to implement that. And maybe it's not a huge, obvious thing. Maybe at one point tomorrow in your classroom, if you haven't been using the norms, you ask somebody to paraphrase, and you get brave enough to ask and to do that awesome wait time until somebody's brave enough to try. Maybe it's just something small like that. I'm waving goodbye because I know you gotta go. So last thing, reflection. This was actually what Rusty wanted us to do for our inclusion activity before we did clap, stomp, snap. I think ours was better. But when prompted, it says, stand and share your response to the following question with an eye contact partner. What is one success that you have been able to record in your implementation guide as you continue your journey with creating a collaborative classroom? Partner A shares first, B pauses and paraphrase, and inquires as necessary. And then switch roles. Any questions? After this, I think it's just the survey, which would be the next slide. So, all right. So reflect on that for a few seconds. Find an eye contact partner and share your success, please.